Hello, everybody, and welcome to Commodity Culture, where we break down the commodity space for both new and experienced investors. Before we get started, standard disclaimer: nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. And today on the show, our guest is a sound money advocate, an expert on precious metals, and the chief market analyst of ITM Trading, somebody I've wanted to have on the show for a long time now. So I'm very excited to welcome Lynette Zang. Thank you so much for joining the show.
I'm very, very happy to be here, Jesse. Thank you so much for having me.
I am delighted to have you. And as you are a first time guest, we always start with the origin story. So, how did you first discover gold, silver, and how did you first start believing in sound money? And how did that road lead you to where you are today?
Wow. Well, how much time do we have? But I'll start at the beginning because really I have been groomed for this moment in time. And when you're asking about gold, particularly, my uncle Al was a major antique dealer. And he was my favorite uncle. I was his favorite niece. And he really taught me about hard assets and how they move from undervaluation to fair valuation to overvaluation to fair valuation in a constant loop, but they don't disappear, and quality is always quality. So one day my parents and I were at his house and he goes, "Come here, I want to show you something." And he takes us in this back bedroom where he has two tall floor safes. Now I was 10 years old, so that would have been 1964 at that time. And he opens the doors to these safes and he tells us, "If anything should happen to me, Aunt Bertie will be well taken care of for the rest of her life because of what's in these safes." And I turned around and looked. Of course, at 10, I didn't really comprehend the entire part and scope of that particular lesson. But one day I was writing and I said, if you were alive like I was in 1971, and then it hit me. He had, knowing what I know now, I'm going to take a guess. And I would say he probably had three monster boxes. So at least 1,500 1-ounce gold coins in each one of those safes. But in 1964, it was illegal to hold more than 5 ounces in any other way than the way that my uncle was holding it. And that was a legal way that he could use in the real economy legally. So, that was a huge lesson. But I've always been in banking. I started in banking when I was 15 because my father was, a little bit bigger fish in a very tiny pond. He was a developer. And I studied business finance. So, and then I was in banking. And when I got divorced, I had 2 babies to raise. So I became a stockbroker because you don't make very much money in banking. I needed to make more money. And so, when I look at the path that I've taken to get here, in 1987, so I was in the markets like 1 year, and I was there on Black Monday. I stumbled across what was called non-dollar denominated bonds, which are just bonds that are issued in different currencies. Well, if I was going to position them, because I found a triple, particularly the one I remember, it was a 5-year piece of paper, AAA rated. It was a McDonald's bond. Today, ethically, I'd probably have a hard time selling that. However, the coupon on it was like 12 and 3/4. So I had to understand currencies. And back in the 80s, you could get with any head of any trading desk directly and have your conversations. So I learned about currencies from the head of Shearson Lehman. And we did that for about a year and a half. That was my first call every morning. I'd study about particularly New Zealand bonds I was drawn to. We made so much money on that trade. But what also happened, which was way more important, I do consider myself an artist, and I see patterns. And I saw patterns as I was studying currencies and currency cycles and how they move so that I could give my clients educated choices. And I discovered that, like everything else, currencies have a life cycle, particularly government-backed debt-based currencies. without exception, they all end up at zero purchasing power, which is frankly where we are right now. The only reason that any currency has any level of purchasing power right now is because of the confidence that the public has. And when they created, they knew that people married the legal money of the state. So, it's kind of a long story because I have a long history. I mean, I'm going to be 69 in a couple of weeks. So, yeah, I've been groomed for this moment in time. I knew in 2002, the technical language of the market was telling me that the day of the dollar was done. So that's when I moved full time into precious metals because I knew that that's the only way that you can protect yourself is with sound money.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wanted to follow up on that by touching on a tweet you made in regards to the fact that US budget deficits are exploding like never before. And you wrote, "Do you think this matters? Hashtag got gold, hold it, own it. The outlook for the ballooning federal budget is essentially unprecedented, and investors are getting nervous." So could you break down what you're seeing there when it comes to US budget deficits and how holding gold can help protect people in this situation?
Absolutely. Number one, what I'm about to say is true whether you're a government, a corporation, or an individual. It's just a different scale. Okay. So taking on debt can make you appear to be liquid, to have lots of money, to have lots of growth. And the problem is that the system is based on constantly compounding debt. And that's really the only tool that they have. But every single time they issue new money, the value of all the money that's out there goes down. That's the purchasing power. That's the inflation. So if they can control the inflation at that 2%, they rob you of your purchasing power, but you don't change your behavior. However, running higher than 2%, and especially where we were from all that money printing and that loose monetary policy, in other words, interest rates at zero and lots of free money, that makes it look like we have growth. All that was taking on more debt. So when you're looking at the US government, who issues the treasury bond, which is the underpinning, the foundation of the global markets. And we're seeing what's happening. I mean, just yesterday, in a long treasury bond went below 50 cents on the dollar. It's the second time in a week that that's happened. That's never historically happened before, because that's an indication of investors' concern on whether or not that entity, whether a government, corporation, or an individual, is going to be able to repay that debt. So the world is looking at whether or not the US is going to repay that debt at a time when on October 1st, we may have another government shutdown, right? So when you're looking at the deficits, all the central bank really has to regulate the rate and speed of inflation are interest rates. And interest rates have been anchored at 0% since 2009. And without exception, every single government that has attempted to raise rates since 2009, including the US government starting in 2016, it has been a big, fat fail. And unfortunately, the only answer is more debt. And who's buying that debt? But the global central banks are buying the debts of the governments. Doesn't make them particularly independent, as they want to say, nor does it make the economy look healthy. So, yeah, what's the answer? The only tool they have is this. That's it. And we are already officially at 3 cents worth of purchasing power. Why isn't all this stimulus stimulating? Or who, better question is, who is it stimulating? Because it's not the public. for sure. That's your K-shaped recovery. That's your wealth and income inequality. And the bottom line is if there's no purchasing power left in the currency, and if that's official, you know it's worse than that. And they don't have the key tool, which are interest rates, to regulate the rate and speed of that inflation. And since this is a Ponzi scheme, it requires confidence. And the only level of confidence left is the public's confidence. Once that is lost, you're in a hyperinflationary depression. And this is global. In the US, we are most likely to feel it worse than anybody else because we've been the world reserve currency. And so we've had privileges because they go, oh, the US won't default. Because after all, we can just print the money to repay that debt. Well, not if nobody is going to accept it. Not when you start to see interest rates spike. And I'll say all this for your viewers because I said this just a couple of weeks ago. And I promise to let people know. If any of you out there are holding variable rate debt and you can get rid of that variable rate debt, you better do it now. This is probably your last best opportunity to do so. So yeah, if you're going in to a knife fight in fiat money products, stocks, bonds, ETFs, insurance policies, all of that garbage, those are just contracts. And contracts are subject to counterparty risk. What does the Bank for International Settlements tell us is the only financial asset that runs zero counterparty risk? Gold, right here. And by the way, when they need to get the confidence of the public back again, and they do those overnight revaluations, that's how they do it. They revalue something that has no intrinsic value against something that's 100% intrinsic value. And it's 100% intrinsic value because it's used in every single sector of the global economy, period. So this is your bazooka. Silver is a secondary monetary metal. I've done studies on what happens to both of these during hyperinflationary events. And while you will see the silver gold gap narrow for a period, actually when you get into the dead thick of it, then that expands again. So I use silver personally for barterability. And I have fractional silver pieces because it's universal. Both of these are universal. But gold is the primary currency metal, and it has absolutely the only financial asset that has no counterparty risk. Everything else is all contracts, and it's all counterparty risk. And you can see, I'm a tangible gal. There's a reason. I'm an ex-banker. I'm an ex-stockbroker. And I don't own any of that garbage. I do have cash because I'm running a business. That's still our tool of barter. But that's it.
That makes a ton of sense. And I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into hyperinflation. You mentioned you've studied gold and silver and how they perform in past hyperinflationary scenarios. And I think a lot of people watching from, Western nations, places like my home country of Canada, the US, they've heard of hyperinflation perhaps occurring in countries like Argentina, Venezuela, back in Weimar, Germany. There's been some examples, Lebanon, I believe, as well. But could you maybe walk us through what happens
Turkey,
could you maybe walk us through what happens to people's day-to-day lives in the scenario of hyperinflation and how gold and silver can protect in that scenario as well?
Okay. So what happens, because most people, there's a normalcy bias, right? And like I said, when they created the system, the one thing that there were two things that they knew. They knew many other things, but two key things. Number one, that people marry the legal money of the state. So it's hard for them to imagine that this can't regain some of its value. They're married to it. So if they make the stock markets, the bond markets, those kind of markets, real estate markets look like they're going up in nominal terms, the prices go up, then people think that they can save themselves in those assets. The problem today is that those assets are severely overvalued, and particularly in the product space, like any of your stocks, bonds, ETFs, that kind of thing, you can only convert them back into this garbage. And so 1,000,000,000,000 times zero is zero, last time I looked. But gold has the broadest base of buyer, and so does physical silver, and physical, not the garbage contracts, right? But the physical, again, it's used in every single sector of the global economy, which means that out of all assets, both gold and silver have the broadest base of demand, and therefore they never go to zero. And they've not been able to figure out how to duplicate some of the qualities in gold and silver in a lab. So if they need those qualities, like in electronics and space travel, in the financial system, etc., they can only get that through owning physical gold and silver. The other thing is, once you own it and it's in your possession, essentially it's invisible. You keep anything, and now they're trying to change that, but at this point, that's still true. If you're sitting in any fiat money products, you have a bank account, you have a stock brokerage account, you have an insurance company account, that's all easily visible and therefore easy to take away. Even, I'm sorry to say this, but even gold held inside of IRAs, right? They know you got it. They can determine how they're going to tax you on it. They can easily confiscate it because of the limitations that they put around what you can hold inside of an IRA. Like, this is a collectible coin. The date happens to be 1914. This is not allowed inside of an IRA. So I am very happy to own it because I want to be in this classification, since historically this has not been confiscated. And let's face it, desperate governments do desperate things. And in the US, gold has been confiscated 3 times historically. We only know about 33, but the Civil War, and I think it was also the War of 1812, right? So physical gold, physical silver means that you have real money as they're destroying the rest of whatever little bit of purchasing power is left in this and transitioning us into the new system, CBDCs, which is the next, what they like to call innovation in money. Because with this, the public had control. If you did not like what the government was doing, you could go in to any bank with a $20 bill and walk out with an ounce of gold. And that would create restrictions around what the government could do. That's why they had to get rid of the gold in the system. So then they went to this. Well, obviously it's got my picture on it. It's not, it's not real. But then again, even if it was government based, it's not real. It is a derivative of this. Okay. However, then they came up with this, which does not protect your purchasing power, right? Inflation is actually baked into the system because they knew that not one man in a million understands inflation. Little worrying when both Jay Powell and Christine Lagarde came out and said that they didn't understand inflation either. Not surprised, but a little worrying since they're the ones that are guiding this journey. But when you're looking at how gold and silver can protect you, this is that warm body of water that the frog has been sitting in, right? If you don't jump out of that pot now and position into your gold and silver, you will not be able to maintain your purchasing power. You will not be able to maintain your lifestyle, because when it happens very rapidly. Wasn't it Ernest Hemingway said, how do you go bankrupt? Well, slowly at first and then fast. So Gold and silver outside of the system, the only asset that runs no counterparty risk, all the other assets are contracts. They go away. They don't protect your ability to sustain a reasonable standard of living. And that means all the money that you've accumulated, the fiat money that you've accumulated based on all your years of work, however many years that is, poof, up in a cloud of smoke. You have worked for zero. But you have your wealth in gold and silver, you can always, 100% of the time, because of that broad-based demand, you can always convert that into any tool of barter anywhere in the world. It's universal. Nothing else can say that. Gold and silver. When I travel with gold and silver in case.
And you mentioned central bank digital currencies. You also recently released a video on your channel called Safeguarding Against Central Bank Digital Currencies. So, how close do you think we are to a global rollout of CBDCs? Are some countries more ahead of the curve than others when it comes to releasing these? Ultimately, the IMF has talked about trying to roll it out globally. I think that would be very difficult to do, but obviously it looks like something they're going to try. So what is your outlook for government attempts to implement a CBDC? And obviously gold and silver is the answer to safeguarding your wealth against them, but to speak about that as well.
Well, personally, I think we are one major crisis away from that happening. And we're close to that next major crisis. So I think we're very, very close. I don't think that I know this is going to be shocking, and especially for your viewers, I'm sure this is going to be really shocking, but I don't think we know everything. I don't think we're being told everything about where they are. And when you refer to the IMF has a currency called the SDR, which is a basket of currencies that's been around since 1969. And everybody has some. Everybody has a boatload of it, in fact, since 2009 and again just recently. So what the IMF is talking about doing, and frankly, when you just kind of put your logical head on it, since everybody has that already, that is the most likely currency to take over as the world reserve currency. And I say that because what they have planned is really a two-tier system where you have the IMFs, if they all have their way, and I'm going to speak to this afterwards, but where you have the IMF's currency that includes a basket of every currency on the planet, because they have the ability to do that. And then all other CBDC currencies are just local. So it would be the US dollar coin, or, and they'll keep it US dollar because see, the dollar's still there, even though it's completely different. So every country will have a local currency, and that will make cross-border payments around the world a whole lot easier because the SDR can just simply convert from one country's currency into the other country's currency and theoretically seamlessly, but it's not done yet. They still have to change laws, which is really important. We got to get those laws changed so that the theft is legalized, which is what the government's job is. But when you're talking about gold, you look at the global central banks that have been accumulating gold through the first half of this year at the fastest pace ever. Because if you hold gold, then you still have your freedom because you have choices. If you're all in fiat money, like Canada is, what choices will you have? That's absolutely zero. Whoever is in control of all of this stuff is going to be controlling everything. And here in the US, because we tout, we're still used more than any other country globally, that has gone down, used in global trade. That has declined substantially and reasonably, and actually very rapidly over the last couple of years, because the US has shown the world that we will weaponize this currency just if you do something we don't like, we're going to weaponize it against you. And the world is going, not so great. We've been exporting inflation. We've been exporting deflation. Now we're going to seize everything. No, no, no. So global central banks have been accumulating gold at the fastest pace ever so that they can retain their choices, retain their freedoms, and retain the control, which is exactly the same reason that individuals should be buying gold and silver for barterability.
I want to touch on silver for a moment here because silver stackers in particular, a lot of salty silver stackers have been leaving comments on my videos. They're fed up with bullish messaging on silver, videos that proclaim silver is a great opportunity. I had Andy Schechtman on recently. He said silver is the trade of a generation. That seemed to rile up a lot of people. Yeah, me too. But I want to read you a comment, and this is a typical comment of this sort of person, and get your response. This person says, the price of silver is cent by cent set by banks and nobody else. Whether this price determination will ever break is questionable because the paper trade still rules and not the physical market. There are no signs whatsoever that we are close to a breaking point. In fact, what you do see is that banks are getting an even stronger grip on the price rather than the other way around. What is your response to that?
Well, my response to that is there's a lot of accuracy in there, but what people are losing sight of is the difference between the paper market, which is all those contracts we've been talking about, which is exactly what that comment is referring to, and the physical markets where we're seeing premiums way higher than the spot price. But in either case, and I think this is critically important, and it does take a level of nuance in it, but I think it's critically important for people to understand what the true fundamental value of any asset or any instrument is. So how do you know what that is? Because, if you believe Wall Street, then you're just believing the lie. How many times can you be lied to and you don't know the truth? So here's the truth. I really am more about gold as the primary monetary currency. So this is how you get the true value, and then you can attach that to silver. Since money is created from debt, fiat money is created from debt, and gold is hard money, it's good money, is the flip side. You take all the debt that's been created in the world, and that'll give you an indication of how much money has been created. And you divide it by all the gold that exists in the entire world, whether it's above ground, because we can reclaim, we can account for like 98% of it, or it's in ground, right? Let's make this simple. You divide all the debt with all the gold, and that gives you an indication of its true fundamental value, because the most important function, and this is a key in determining the fundamental value of any instrument or asset, what was the single most important function of that asset? For me, in my opinion, you can have a different one, it's to hold the value of your assets over time, right? So silver, will it go back to the historic ratio? I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But what I can tell you is both gold and silver are severely, severely, severely undervalued. And the last time I did the calculation, and it's been a while, and other people may do calculations different than I do, but gold was north of 15,000 an ounce. So with spot at 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, it's a bargain. And silver is the secondary monetary metal. It straddles both worlds in that it is monetary, but it's also industrial. It also gets used up in production. Thinking that these people are gods is a mistake. They are human beings and they are fallible. When will this come to a crashing halt? Well, did we not see, 2020, where SLV, so the silver ETF, changed their prospectus because they couldn't put together enough baskets of physical silver to support their share prices. So they just said, which is true, it's very true, that those instruments are merely designed to reflect the spot price, which is a manipulated price. So when will all of this happen? Because that's what people want to know. Because I don't know, I guess they think they're going to have the ability to see it the day before and get prepared, which is not accurate. When you are going to see this, both gold and silver, move toward their fundamental value will be when all confidence in the system is lost. And we're very, very close to that. And the government needs to regain, and central bankers need to regain your confidence. Because then what you see is that overnight revaluation, and globally on average, they do it 3 times. I can't tell you how many times they're going to do it this time. Maybe it's going to be 2, maybe it's going to be 4. I can't tell you till the transition is completed. But that's when you'll see gold start to move toward its fundamental value, as well as silver. So you're right. As long as Wall Street is under control, and when somebody knows they're losing control, if you think about somebody that's drowning and you go out to save them, what do? They hang on even tighter, right? And they jeopardize both of you. So when you see those bullion entities, those banks, taking more control over the price, that the visible price that we see, it's because they know darn well that they are losing control. Demand is far exceeding supply in both silver and gold. And the premiums, people complain about the premiums are showing you the truth, because there's a finite amount of this stuff. There's an infinite amount of this stuff. So keep stacking. Stack gold, but gold is the primary currency metal. It does outperform during hyperinflationary events.
So let's now shift from discussing protecting one's wealth to protecting freedom and personal sovereignty, something most sound money advocates value very highly, including myself. I know you do too. So how do you recommend people protect themselves from government overreach and potential violations of their civil liberties?
Well, I think the biggest way to combat that, honestly, is by building this community. As we were talking about earlier, that's why I do these interviews. That's why I just got back from Australia doing work out there. We have to build a global community. We don't need 100% of the people to understand what's going on. We just need a very vocal, 3%. That's all it took to create the Civil War. Was it the Civil War? One of those wars, but 3%. So the biggest way is by building that community. And I have a mantra that I live by that I've executed here in my house in dead central Phoenix, as well as my bug out location. Food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. Because these are all the things that we need to sustain a reasonable standard of living. But frankly, one person can't do it all. And what has been the methodology of governments is divide and conquer. Because if we're not in community, it's so much easier to control us. So that is such a strong recommendation, is that you come together both locally and globally in community. You bring the gifts that you have been given: food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. You share them with the community so that when they try and control you via this, you can say, nope, because you got this. You got this, you got food, you got a community around you, and then they can't pull it off. I mean, they're going to bring the CBDCs out, and the way from what I've read, the way they're going to sell it to the world is that there will not be any more inflation. Well, when people are freaking out from hyperinflation and you throw them a bone, they're probably going to grab that. But there's nothing of substance in that bone at all. It's just more of the same and even greater control, because then you have your complete loss of privacy. I hold this, I own it outright, it is invisible. Now, I'm holding it so it's not invisible to me or to your viewers, but to the government entities and the central banks. That's why they hate it. So you want to retain your control? Involve a community, and I really am working. I'll tell you, I'm so grateful that I got to spend some time in Australia, and I did 3 events there. In the last 2 events, they were people that already knew my work. And so basically, even though I prepared for this and I had all the goodies and what have you, I threw them out because I thought, well, they can go online and they can see my work. But instead, what I really did, and when I finally realized and finally found my voice, and you're the first person I'm talking about this to, by the way, I haven't even talked to anybody at ITM about this, is that I talked about building community, because that was what was sitting in front of me, and it was so glaring. And I know that the biggest challenge that most people have is getting their friends and their relatives to see what they see. So my new commitment is I am going to figure this out so that I can give the individuals the tool to help build that community, because that's our only hope. It is an absolutely not given that the government and central bankers can get away with it. If we stand together, there are more of us than there are of them. We are powerful. We are strong together. And if we have strong money when what they've got is garbage money, what better?
That's an excellent message. And yes, I think there are some people who believe that the central planners are all powerful, all knowing, evil geniuses who have already planned 20 moves ahead and they're on top of the game. But a lot of these people are extraordinarily incompetent.
Yeah, no, they have planned 20 moves ahead. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. This has been happening for since 1913. And before that, that's just when they started to execute. And again in 71. But they are not gods. They are human beings. They are fallible. They don't know what it's like to live in the real world that you and I live in.
Yes, completely agree with you there. Lynette, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an extremely enlightening conversation. Before I do let you go, for those who want to learn more, could you tell us about ITM trading?
Yes. ITM trading, I've been there since 2002, but it's been around since 95. And basically the strategy that we execute, and this is what makes us different, because we are a physical gold and silver dealer and we can deal in anything. We've got really long-term relationships. But the strategy that we execute there is based upon my studies of currency and currency life cycles and those repeatable patterns that have happened 100% of the time. Could this time be different? Maybe, but it typically isn't. And so this is not just to throw you in some gold and silver, good luck to you. This is a long-term relationship based upon your personal goals and what you have to work with and where you are at the moment. What are you trying to accomplish? Your strategy is going to be the same as mine, but tweaked, because we're at different stages in our life and we probably have some different goals. But the foundation is the same. We are so keen on education that, like you said earlier, don't take anybody's word for it. Don't take my word for it. In my work, I give you at least some of the links, because it would be a book every week, but at least some of the links to my research. Go ahead and research it yourself. Read it yourself. If you come to a different conclusion than I do, okay, I'm not going to tell you your opinion is less valid than mine. But if you just have hopium, then frankly, my opinion is more valuable than yours, because it's well educated. So I think everybody should have a well-educated opinion, but they have to do their own due diligence. And you can find us, we have two YouTube channels. One is ITM Trading, where I talk about all of this economic stuff, and I try to translate financial noise into understandable language. That's my goal. I'm going to get better at it. I feel like I'm at a growth spurt because I have a new higher level mission on that now. But we also have Beyond Gold and Silver, where we talk about the rest of the pieces of the mantra. And the goal there is to build global communities that can help each other about all the pieces: food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter, to see where you are. And that's what we're trying to do there, is meet you where you are. If you've never grown a tomato before, we're going to help you do that. If you've never done long food storage, we're going to help you do that. If you have and you know how to do it, join us and help us help others. Build that community, because we also have a specific community called Thrivers. And we've just recently started that. It's not been out very long, but that's really where we can do even more community work. They have Thrivers have direct access to me on a weekly basis. But that's the goal, is really to build this global community so that everybody can win and come together and say no to those in power. They're the 1%. We're the 99%. There are more of us than there are of them.
I love it. I'm going to put links to all of that in the description below for people who want to check it out. Thank you once again, Lynette, for joining us and sharing your knowledge with the audience.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you want me to come back again.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.